Let's start off. I mean, we definitely have to talk about what's going on the ground, and
I think so, yes.
the battle in Donbass, which is really underway, and it's been underway for a while now. I
Absolutely,
mean,
yeah.
that cauldron, is closed, and it's been undergoing air attack for a while now, and it has to, because those Ukrainian troops are really deeply entrenched in that area. But there are reports of a lot of artillery, a lot of Russian military who are moving into the region. Zelensky is saying this is going to be a big battle. He's, of course, saying that the Ukraine soldiers are ready to come out victorious. The Russians have cut off any ability for those soldiers, from my understanding, to be resupplied, for any logistics support, for pretty much anything: oil, lubricant, gas, food, water. I mean, from what I understand, they're kind of, as Scott Ritter put it, they're kind of sitting ducks there. But we'll see. Two things that I also want to say before you jump in. That S-300 from Slovakia was destroyed, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. It was destroyed in a town right outside of Dnipropetrovsk, and it has been taken out. So much for that S-300. I just have one thing that's really bothering me is why and how did Russia let this S-300 get all the way to Dnipro, which is, if people see it on a map, Dnipro is pretty much center east. So it went all the way from Slovakia, Poland, all the way across the west, past Kiev, all the way to the pretty much the borders of the Donbass region. I don't know, a lot of people are coming in and out of Kiev as well. It seems like the west of Ukraine, all the way to Kiev, is very porous. It seems like, you can pretty much just drive in and out of there, which really has me thinking as to what the hell's going on. We have that, then we have the statement from Lavrov, who came out with a statement, and he said that the operation in Ukraine aims to put an end to America's plans for global domination. Lavrov also criticized Borrell, because Borrell's statements have been pretty much along the lines of the only way to end this crisis is through a military victory for Ukraine, and the only way to solve what's going on in Ukraine is via war. That's the top diplomat of the European Union. And Lavrov said, this is an utterly serious change, even in the policy that the EU and the West, under US leadership, there is no doubt about it, began to pursue after the start of our special military operation, a policy that reflects anger, in some ways even frenzy, and which, of course, is determined by Ukraine being transformed into a foothold for the final suppression of Russia. Those were the statements from Lavrov, Alexander.
Yes. Well, indeed so. And I'm going to make a few quick observations. Let's start with why they waited for it to get all the way to Dnipro or Dnipropetrovsk, whichever you prefer. The Ukrainians call it Dnipro. That's its official name today in Ukraine. Dnipropetrovsk is the Russian name. It's the one the Russians still use. It was the name it had, of course, when it was part of the Soviet Union. And why did they let it go all the way there? Well, I can only speculate. I can make a few speculations. Firstly, they probably didn't want it. They may not have wanted to hit it whilst it was passing through civilian areas. That's one possibility. The second possibility is that it's more difficult to hit a moving target, and the moment it stops and goes into a secret location, or what's supposed to be a secret location, you hit it then. And then the third reason, which I suspect may be the most useful one, is it may be that the Russians actually wanted to see where it would go, where it would end up. Because, of course, locating it in Dnipro, it would have meant that it would have been used, the intention was to try to use it over Donbass. In other words, part of the Battle of the Donbass. So it may be that the Russians wanted to find out, is it going to be used there, or is it going to be used to try and protect Kiev? So I think that's probably, there may have been any number of reasons, but as we don't know, as we can't really get into the minds of the Russian leadership, I'm not going to speculate further. All I would say is that actually if you take a step back, this has been a debacle because there's been all this talk about sending heavy weapons into Ukraine. There's been all this talk about sending this particular air defense system in Ukraine. The Slovaks were at one point apparently not keen. They held out for Patriot missiles. Apparently, Biden himself called the Slovak government to persuade them to release it. There was a huge amount of toing and froing. Then they showed film of it trundling eastward. And all that happened is that as soon as it arrived in Ukraine, it was left to go to Dnipro, where it was immediately destroyed. So, I mean, this is a debacle. And I think it's also a warning that if you start trying to send heavy weapons like tanks and things, of which, by the way, so far there's been very little sign that these are not going to survive in Ukraine for very long. Now, secondly, about the fact that that Kiev is porous, that people can come backwards and forwards and things of this kind. I think there's some truth to this. But again, I'm going to make a suggestion that there's a political aspect to this, which is that, of course, the Russians have never tried to prevent people going to Kiev. If you remember, there was that meeting, or supposed meeting, with Zelensky and those EU officials, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Polish Prime Minister, the Slovaks, all of those people. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who wonder whether they ever went to Kiev at all. But I think, from a Russian point of view, killing Western leaders or isolating Kiev in that kind of way would be a dangerous thing to do at a time like this. And I think they probably won't do it. If you go back to other wars that I can remember, if you go back to Saigon, for example, it was quite possible for Western leaders to go in and out of Saigon right up until a couple of weeks, in fact, days before it finally fell. So I wouldn't attach personally too much significance to any of this. The big fighting in Donbass, it seems to me, is now happening in two places. Firstly, Mariupol, and this has been a grinding battle, but it looks as if the forces there have been the Ukrainian forces there have been bottled up in these two factories. There was an incredibly plaintive message from some of them that I read this morning. Some Marines feeling that they've been abandoned by Ukraine. Some other troops, one of the Azov leaders also. Apparently there's been another mass surrender of Ukrainian troops in Mariupol. This has been a long, difficult, grinding battle. But the other battle that really is important is of the Russian forces pressing steadily towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, tightening the vice, and that's where the big battle is going to be. And that's going to start to happen within the next couple of days. I mean, I think the Battle of Donbass is already being fought, but I think that's really where always our focus should be.
Right. Well, my point about the borders wasn't so much, I mean, I never once was suggesting that Russia take out leaders of the West. God, no. I never once suggested that, nor do I think Russia is thinking of that. I think if Russia wanted to take out Zelensky, they would have done it on day one. They obviously want Zelensky alive, and they want him to sign that surrender agreement, and they want him to sign it because he's been given so much legitimacy from the West. So once he signs that surrender agreement, no one's going to be able to sit there and say, well, we don't recognize Zelensky's surrender. It's just not going to be feasible. So that's why the Russians are keeping him alive. The reason I talk about the porous border is because it seems like it's a porous border on the West. And I highlight just the simple fact that leaders are coming and going as they wish. I mean, you had the EU leaders, you had Boris Johnson making a surprise visit. He just popped into Kiev. I mean, it does seem like it's pretty open. And I say that because I am getting reports. I don't know how reliable they are, but they are coming from some reliable sources that are saying the troops in Donbass are getting a lot of heavy weapons and artillery and resupplies because of those porous borders, and that the Russians are really not doing anything with regards to bottling up the West or preventing heavy weapons and artillery from getting to the West. Even Jake Sullivan hinted at such in a statement he gave over the weekend. He said we are giving weapons to Ukraine every single day, and a lot of them are reaching the battlefield, the front lines. I mean, that was Sullivan's statement. Of course, I'm getting from a lot of other sources, credible sources as well, saying that the Russians are taking out everything and they're not letting anything get through. So, which one is it? But I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and say maybe the Russians, for some reason, are not able to get to these heavy weapons, and they are pouring into Donbass. Given the fact that you're seeing, leaders just kind of hop on the train or on their car and just trot on into Kiev. I mean, you're getting both sides. That's my point. You're getting people who are saying the Russians are getting to everything, and you're getting people who are saying, analysts who are saying the Russians aren't able to take out anything. And I want to stress the point, this is not my opinion. This is what I'm researching and reading, and both sides are coming from very credible analysts, in my opinion. I'm not talking mainstream media. I'm talking analysts who are pro-Russian in both instances or anti-Russian in both instances. I'm getting both narratives.
Yes. Now, Jake Sullivan's comments were made in response to an interview, and of course he was trying to give the impression, he was anxious to give the impression that the administration is doing everything he possibly can to help Ukraine. Now, the type of weapon systems that the United States has so far been sending to the Ukraine are things like anti-tank missiles, handheld manpads, those sort of things. Those, I have no doubt, are getting through to some extent because it's difficult to stop them. But if you're talking about heavy weapons, and it depends what you mean by heavy weapons, but if you mean tanks, mechanized artillery, infantry fighting vehicles, those sort of things, my understanding is that they are not getting through. So this is, I think, the big discrepancy. Now, artillery, from what I've understand, is that, and that's really the queen of this battle, because that's where that's what's going to make the big difference. Artillery, the Ukrainians are now becoming increasingly outgunned, and they're also struggling to get ammunition. And I read an article, I think it was in the Financial Times, that the West anyway doesn't have ammunition that they can supply to Ukraine because the Ukrainians still use Soviet-era calibers, and that NATO calibers are different, so you can't just fill Ukrainian guns with Western shells. It can't be done. But if you're talking about heavy guns, the West hasn't sent any of its own heavy guns so far. And of course, the German government has now said it won't anyway, because their own supplies, they're not in a position to do that, because that would start to deplete their own supplies. So I understand that a lot of the sort of lighter weapons, the anti-tank missiles, the anti-aircraft missiles, those sort of things are getting through, but the big, heavy artillery, the tanks, those kind of things are not.
Okay. What do you make of Lavrov's statement?
Well, it is a further sign of the hardening, of the steady hardening of Russian positions. And it is completely uncompromising. And it is clearly, I think, prepared in response to the fact that the Austrian Chancellor is now heading to Moscow. I think that the Austrian Chancellor has been sent to Moscow. This is the first visit by a Western leader to Moscow since the war began. I mean, Scholz and Macron have called Putin many times, as have various other Western leaders, but this is the first actual head of government from the West who's actually gone to Moscow to meet with Putin himself. So I think he's been put up to do it by Scholz. In fact, that's pretty much, I think, the universal belief. Olaf Scholz is now facing a deepening economic crisis. German industry is incredibly unhappy. He's desperately looking for some sort of compromise so that he can save face. He's also under immense pressure from the Greens within his own government, who always want to escalate further than he wants to escalate. So he's sending this person to Moscow in order to negotiate, and Lavrov is signalling, look, we're not interested. we're not going to negotiate because for us, this is an existential issue. And that's essentially what he's saying.
You think that Putin's going to be able to hold firm on that? Or do you think that Putin
Yes.
will cave
No, I don't think
and
he's going to
perhaps
cave. I think
float another
politically,
A Minsk type of agreement?
I think the possibility for that is ebbing away. And I think that's partly what Lavrov was saying. I think the Ukrainians had a chance 2 weeks ago when they met with the Russians in Istanbul. Do you remember? They came up with all those concessions, which they then spun as, the Russians moving towards them. But they made all those concessions and Russian PR was dreadful. Well, under enormous pressure from Britain and the United States and Brussels, they pulled back all those concessions. And I think what that's happening is that that's leading to a hardening of the Russian position. And I think that's what Lavrov is doing. I mean, he would not have made these comments if he hadn't cleared them with Putin.
Yeah, I mean, you have Lavrov's comments, which are definitely on the harder side of things. And then you have someone like Peskov's comments, which are definitely on the softer side of things. So, Putin's going to have to, make a call. Which side of the Kremlin is he going to be leaning towards? And Russian public opinion is definitely much more on the harder side of things, especially given all the quite troubling and disturbing propaganda that the Ukraine and UK-US propaganda machines are putting out there with regard to disturbing videos of what they're doing to Russian soldiers or what they want to do to Russian soldiers. I mean, we're talking Syria, IS kind of propaganda that's being put out by the UK, US, and Ukrainian spin machines. It's hardening Russian opinion of this war even more, to the point where I honestly believe if Putin does not take things to a level where it is considered an outright win for Russia, let me just phrase it like that, that Russians will turn on Putin to a certain extent. I'm not saying regime change or stuff like that. I'm just saying, the Russian society will be extremely upset to the point where we may see Putin's support drop drastically if Putin doesn't get a clear victory, not a pariah victory, not just, okay, we just got Donbass and Lugansk and now we're happy. I'm talking an assertive, definitive win.
Well, my own personal view, a number of points there. I mean, Sergei Lavrov is the foreign minister of Russia. He's a member of Russia's Security Council. He sits in all the top bodies of the Russian government. Dmitry Peskov is a spokesman. That's all he is. I mean, he is Putin's press spokesman. He's also an extremely incompetent press spokesman, in my opinion, and somebody who's been around for a very, very long time. But there is no equivalence in authority between the two. And I think that is the first thing to say. Also, I think if you try and pass through Peskov's comments, I don't think, what I thought, they were just muddled and incompetent. I don't think that they were intended as, to undermine policy. I just think that Peskov is hopelessly out of his depth in this situation. And Lavrov is the person who meets with Putin, who attends meetings of the Security Council, who is regularly briefed on what he has to say. And I think these kind of statements that we see coming out of Lavrov at the moment, and the kind of things that are coming out of the Russian media at the moment, strongly suggests to me that the Kremlin, which is more than Putin, understands perfectly well what you're saying, which is that Russian society is now in a mood to see this thing through. I should say that, I've seen films. Now, we've always got to be very careful about these films because one can never be absolutely sure, but I've seen films of Russian troops traveling through Russia, towards Ukraine, across Oriol province, for example, Oriol region, and you see the people, the people in the villages and the towns coming out and waving Russian flags as they pass by, supporting them. In other words, I don't. But I found it very interesting that some of them were red flags. I think Putin would be extremely ill-advised to go against that kind of sentiment. And I think he knows it. And I think he's certainly briefed about it. I don't think it's going to happen. Now, I think at the start of this operation, I think there was a belief that maybe Zelensky would come to his senses. Maybe the Ukrainians would come to their senses. They do this deal. After all, remember, the Russians began negotiations with the Ukrainians the day after the special operation was launched. But I think that the Russians have become utterly exasperated with the Ukrainians. I think the military is doing its own thing. I think they will eventually settle the issue of the Donbass. And then I don't think, as I said before, I don't think they're going to pull out of these places in the south, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and all the rest. I think more likely they will enlarge their operations as they need to until they achieve whatever result it is that they are expecting to, and which fulfills, as they say, the original objectives of the operation. Now, as to Donbass, you go back to what the Russian general staff said. The General Rudskoy pointed out. He said, that these places in Donbass have been very heavily fortified. So it's going to take a time to break them down, but I've no doubt that they will.
Well, Olaf Scholz is sending the Austrian Chancellor to Moscow, but even Scholz must understand then that the Russians aren't going to compromise. So then, essentially, what is the reason? Does he really think that the Russians are that malleable in that just sending the Chancellor of Austria will somehow change their position? Or is there a lot more to it? Is Olaf Scholz signaling to Russia, look, we can get Zelensky to surrender. We'll find a way to get Zelensky to surrender. Just trust us. Perhaps that may be the message. Maybe it's something else. Maybe the Austrian Chancellor is there to deliver a different kind of message. Maybe a certain ultimatum, given Borrell's comments. I mean, Borrell was he was crystal clear. We want more.
Absolutely.
We want to escalate. And Borrell said we're going to win. I mean, he seems confident. I know. I'm not saying Borrell's the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm just going off of his comments. That's it. I'm just going off of his comments.
Yeah, you don't need to send an Austrian Chancellor to Moscow to send an ultimatum. That's the very first thing. You can convey ultimatums over the phone. You can do it in the way Borrell has done. If you're going to send the Austrian Chancellor to Moscow, it's because you want to enter into talks, and you want to do it in ways that nobody can overhear you. That's the key point to understand. If the Austrian Chancellor,
including my point, I mean, you're leading to my point. They don't. Yeah. He's sending the Austrian Chancellor because they don't want the U.S., NATO, or the EU to overhear them. At least that's Olaf Scholz's thinking.
That is exactly its thinking. That's exactly why Merkel went to Moscow at the time of the Debaltseve affair back in 2015. They want to send somebody to Moscow. Scholz himself cannot go. I mean, it would be that would be a crisis within the German government if he went. So he's sending his friend, the Austrian Chancellor, to go in his place so that this person can then speak to Putin and the Russian leadership without the NATO people, the EU people, listening in the way they can about the only place in Europe where you can conduct a conversation with the Russians securely is in the Kremlin. I mean, that's about the only place you can do it, actually. So I think that's why he's going. Now, what it is that Scholz hopes that this person is going to achieve there is a very, very good question. Now, I don't know because I can't enter into Scholz's mind. I don't think that Scholz at the moment really has any serious hopes that a ceasefire is coming, or at least anything that could be, could be the end of this operation at any time soon. I think he understands the political constraints on Putin, and I think he also understands Putin's intentions. I think that the reason he's going there is because he's trying some way to keep things going on the energy front. Because the German business community is saying, look, for heaven's sake, we cannot dispense with Russian gas. We can't dispense with Russian oil. So we have to have this continuing to flow in some way. And I think the Austrian Chancellor is partly going in order to talk about that, but he's also, I think, partly looking to find some way going forward to maintain some kind of political dialogue with the Russians, so that something can be rescued once the main fighting is over. I suspect he will float this idea of an Easter ceasefire, but I don't think the Russians are in any mood for that at the moment. The one thing I would say is this, and I think one of the factors that is causing a lot of unease in Russia, and which has led to a lot of complaints, by the way, is that Putin himself has not come out for some time and publicly spoken. And I think that before very long, we will see him speaking. And maybe he will use this visit to do that and to set out his views. But of course, he's now got Lavrov in part to do it on his behalf. And of course, Medvedev also.
Yeah, Medvedev has been coming out with many strong statements. I mean, Medvedev, he seems like he would be a very, very tough president if he was to.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be in
I've
office
always
again.
said this. Always said this. I think this. I've always gone against this idea that Medvedev is an Atlanticist integrationist, or whatever it is that he was called. I've never agreed with that view, and I think this has proved it.
So the final question is a question that I asked last time we talked about Ukraine and Russia, but I'm going to ask it again because I think it's the question that everyone asks, and this is coming from a pro-Russia standpoint. So this is going to be a question that many people who are pro-Russia in this conflict are always asking. Yeah. And it has to do with the fact that, okay, you're going to send the Chancellor of Austria, I believe, Nehammer, I believe is,
yes, that's right.
is his name. I always forget his name. Kurtz was a lot easier to remember.
He was also a real personality. I mean,
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was much more personable. I mean, this chancellor is very forgettable, to be quite honest. He just kind of blends in. But anyway, I think it is Nehammer. So you're going to send the Austrian chancellor to speak with Putin. It's going to be the first time that we've had this type of meeting in Moscow since the conflict broke out. And Olaf Scholz is trying to find some sort of off-ramp. And he's trying to find a way to deal with this energy crisis, which is self-inflicted. The EU inflicted it on themselves. Let's not kid ourselves here. They're the ones that are imposing the sanctions. But there was a study done by the German, I forgot which institution or government authority did this study, but they said that Germany will be free from dependence on Russia by 2024. They said that gas is going to be the hardest part to wean Germany off of, but pretty much every other import of Russian resources they will be able to divest from by early to middle 2024, and they're even optimistic about gas as well. This is their report, and they put this report out there.
I mean, so, you get
well. So Scholz,
these are all. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so Scholz is trying to figure out ways maybe to bridge the gap. Maybe to figure out a way to get him to 2023, maybe 2024, maybe top up the reserves as much as they can. He's trying to figure out ways to get out of this mess. The question that everyone on the pro-Russia side always asks, and I'm going to ask it again. I know you're going to say, well, it brings in revenue and it's money that comes into the coffers. But the follow-up question to all of that to that answer is this. Okay, why doesn't Russia, since Europe is at war with Russia, NATO is at war with Russia, they have done everything possible to try and destroy the Russian Federation and to get regime change in Moscow. They've demonized Russia, they've sanctioned Russia, they've canceled Russia. They talk about destroying Russia. They talk about open war with Russia. The belligerence, the hostility is off the charts. I mean, off the charts. Why doesn't Russia just be done with it and turn off the gas to Germany tomorrow? I know what your answer was they want the money, they need the money, but the follow-up question is always this. This is war. This is war with NATO. This is war with the United States, and this is war with the EU. Ukraine is just where this battle is located.
It's the battleground. Yeah.
So if this is war, why doesn't Russia just say, you know what, it's war. We're going to eat the losses from selling the gas to Germany, but we're going to bring the EU to its freaking knees next week.
Yes. Yes.
And once again, this is not me taking sides. I'm just giving everybody what many people on the Russian side of things are asking.
Yes. Right, let's deal first of all with that report, that thing for that institution. Can I just say there's been any number of identical reports from all sorts of academic institutions, all written by academic economists. I read in one, this is about a month ago, that, if they cut off the gas, it would only lead to a 2.2% decline in German GDP. They could find all sorts of other ways around and all sorts of things. So you get all these academics writing this way. You then listen to people from industry, and they tell a completely different story. And I don't just mean people, from the energy industries who basically are saying, look, we just cannot find these alternatives that you're talking about, certainly to gas, even to oil. You're not going to find them by 2024. You're not going to find them by 2030. And that the German industrial machine cannot function effectively without these energy inputs and anything like the kind of efficiency and success that it did before. So you get the academics saying one thing, you get the industry people saying a completely different thing. In this kind of thing, I always go with the industry people. But always remember two things. Firstly, in terms of academics, academics tend to be very, not being overly cynical. They go with who is funding them. So if an institution is being funded in a particular way, which wants people to say, well, you're going to be able to do this within 2 years, well, you'll get a report which says that they can do it within 2 years. You always have to follow the money with these things. I'm not in a position to do it with these institutions. I'm not saying these particular economists are, paid to come up with these things, but I wouldn't be surprised at the same time if they were. So I think, a healthy dose of cynicism about this is deserved. And industry, German industry, is saying something completely different. And also the energy industry is saying something completely different. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Now, the second is, why doesn't Russia cut the gas? Moscow is a place where there's going to be lots of people talking, discussing, debating these things. I think at the beginning of the war, probably still, the predominant mood in the Kremlin is we keep the gas flowing. It provides us with a useful amount of foreign exchange. It helps us to rebuild our financial reserves, our foreign currency reserves. It keeps us going. I would say personally, by the way, that my own personal view about the stability of the Russian currency and the financial system has much less to do with energy exports than people realize. What is keeping the currency stable is the stable nature of the financial system within Russia and the demand for rubles in Russia. Provided that remains strong, they can probably switch off the gas without feeling that they are going, everything is going to come tumbling down. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. I think they can do it. I think up to now, they felt it's in their interests not to do it. I am not party to the internal discussions that take place in the Kremlin, but I would not be surprised if the hardliners who say let's switch the taps off are gaining strength. And for all I know, that is one reason why Olaf Scholz may be concerned and may be sending the Austrian Chancellor to Moscow. There are probably things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Certainly, I think before very long, with a couple of months, years, the energy flow from Russia to the West is going to cease. Russia hasn't got all its pipelines in order to send gas to China and Asia. It can send liquefied natural gas from the Arctic, but that doesn't come in vast quantities. Those liquefied natural gas plants use a lot of Western technology, which has to be substituted, which it can be substituted, but it will take time. So Gazprom is probably lobbying the Kremlin very hard. We get half our income from this business of exporting gas to Europe. We don't want to lose half our income. Let's keep the energy flowing for the time being. We make a big contribution to the budget. Let's keep it going for that reason. So that could very well be what Gazprom is telling the Kremlin. But I'm pretty sure there will be other people who are saying differently, that, we are in a state of war. They're trying to overthrow us. They're trying to destabilize us. The mood of our population is hardening. They're starting to ask, why are we sending our natural resources to fund our enemies, to provide resources to our enemies? Surely this is the point where we put our foot down and say enough. And I'm sure that there is that conversation, that debate going on in Moscow. I think at the start, Gazprom had all the better talking points. I suspect with every passing day, they are in retreat, and it is the other side that is starting to win out.
Right. All right. There's always two sides to the coin, two sides to the equation. The West is always saying, the collective West is saying, we need to cut off the gas in order. Why are we going to fund Putin's war machine? We need to cut off the gas supplies coming from Russia, because they say, why should we fund Putin's war machine? While I can see the hardliners in the Kremlin saying, why should we fund the EU's war machine by giving them the gas? So there's always two sides to that.
I repeat again, I am sure those debates are going on. And, let's not underestimate, this is probably by now a huge amount of anger building up on both sides. There's a huge anger in Moscow, and you see that reflected in Lavrov's comments. And of course, we're not even talking about anger, hysteria. What was it? Lavrov, the word Lavrov used, frenzy. We see that in the West too.